When you hear the word aesthetics, you probably think of a vaporwave album cover, with the text in all caps with spaces in between the letters. Aesthetics is really a system of values which are assigned to art, that we use to interpret it and understand how it achieves a design harmony based on certain principles. Aesthetics are not universal, however, and can depend on the cultural and time period context as well as the subjective taste of the viewer. A great example to start with is the Egyptian canon of proportions. We can all recognize Egyptian art, but there is a detailed system of measurement that dictates many of the well-known characteristics behind the art style. The canon ensures the standardization of depicting the general size of human appearance within the style, resulting in a consistent and refined look that is quickly identified. This concept was further shared and explored throughout art history, and we can see more examples in Persian and Greek cultures, each time being used in the specific cultural context of their time period that heightens the refined and stylized elements which differentiate them from other art movements. Several movements in art can push new and groundbreaking styles to appeal to life and trends at the time, some very popular and innovative, while others can seem contradictory or at odds with the previous established norms. The popular movements tap into what is known as a cultural zeitgeist, or a subconscious consensus of the dominant styles during certain eras. What I'm talking about is taste, or your personal preference, which no one can dispute because you of course get to decide what you enjoy, what art you like to look at, and why you feel that way about it. We rely on cultural tastemakers to guide us and introduce us to the aesthetics which we can relate to and resonate with. But those of us with a more adventurous attitude can seek out and find a wealth of styles that can appeal to just about any unique movement and art style that suits your specific tastes. For myself, I grew up watching the imaginative and wildly creative cartoons of the 80s. Some of my most highly sought after shows were Robotech, Silverhawks, Star Blazers, and Thundercats. Little did I know that a lot of the style I desired most was based on comic book art, as well as Japanese animation and manga. There was a lot of other cartoons and art styles that I liked, but these were the guiding pillars of what constituted good art in my mind. I got into comic books as a teenager and expanded my tastes, and got myself into drawing a lot more, often imitating what I saw on those comic book pages. So my tastes are informed by detailed, semi-realistic depictions and a special attention to technology, science fiction, and sleek futurism. Art styles in video games have gone through a very similar evolution of aesthetics, not only formed through pre-existing art but technical constraints of the medium. We can see analogous movements at a macro scale as games changed through the 70s and 80s, and much more so into our more recent, highly complex and large-scale game projects. With this in mind, let's take a look at some high points of aesthetic design from my perspective, starting with classic Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic is a character that truly captures the aesthetic of the 90s video game mascot. He has influences from both Western and Eastern art history, and his changes in appearance throughout the generations has produced a lot of discussion around his design. His sprite in the first Sonic game is idealized in many ways, a very unrealistic portrayal of a hedgehog with his spines made into blue waves, a face akin to a Disney character or perhaps a sports mascot, with classic white cartoon character gloves and bright red running shoes. His roundness is accentuated by the jump and spin moves in which he goes into a perfect sphere. The running animation builds into a blur of his legs appearing like a wheel. The idle animation gives a nice look into the personality behind the character and lends itself well to the game world overall. In the sequel, we see how the design on Sonic leans more into the cartoon 2D look of Sonic and adds touches with a further exaggerated look when speeding and spin dash that captures the raw kinetic energy perfectly in the oval shape instead of a ball. Sonic appears at his most expressive in this time period, animated in a detailed, rich manner in the style of anime at the time. He even has 2 levels of edge detection animation, depending on how close he is. For me, this is the peak of Sonic aesthetic. Pure 2D stylization. Sonic 3 sees our hero move into a more pre-rendered era, think Donkey Kong Country, with a look that emphasizes the roundness again, but with more shading to give it that pseudo 3D appearance. It's another well-done stylized look with more animation added to the run cycle and new details like Sonic and Tails being able to rotate in a 3D space. We can see them in new angles, further fleshing out that 3D-esque appearance. This Sonic, in my opinion, moves more into a westernized style, hinting at the eager move into 3D Sonic. While he has a more detail and animation, I personally got more of the character's personality through the look of the sprite design in the second game. As we're here, I think he looks kind of static in his expressions and less vivid overall. Next we take a look at Ken from Street Fighter. He starts out fairly decent, bearing the look of a classic Capcom character similar to the art seen in Strider. When Street Fighter II was released, we had a very well defined and distinguishable character, similar to the entire lineup within the game, that set a high standard in the realm of character designs in video games. For this example, let's mostly focus on the idle animation since there are so many different poses and moves. Ken has a moderately realistic appearance, from proportions to stance and animation. His facial features and hair have a more cartoon look. The shading and color give the design a unified presentation that works well. It strikes a nice balance between realism and stylization. For the next iteration of Ken, he has a more animated look, with a dynamic range of characterization placed into the fine-tuned design that oozes personality and confidence. We really believe this is Ken, and we can already imagine the potential for an impressive moveset that lies within this initial design. The Street Fighter Zero/Alpha version of Ken is the height of his aesthetic in my opinion. Street Fighter 3 Ken offers more animation and a move back into a more realistic portrayal. It's arguably not on the same level of balance between simplicity and style of details. This version of Ken isn't really a step down from the previous one. I would say the design reached somewhat of a plateau. If we look into more recent Ken out of curiosity, this one being the Super Street Fighter 2 HD remix, I think this is a case of an overdone or slightly misinterpreted design of the source material. To finish out this, we're going to look at a couple of examples that don't really suit a particularly good aesthetic in my opinion, at least not one that suits my taste. First is Clay Fighter, a game made for the laughs and to be a parody of popular fighting games that was a pretty big hit. It has character models made from clay which are digitized, and the art style is not intended to be high concept, but it is a style of design that looks dated. In the 90s, there was a lot of weird and wacky off-the-wall designs which went for more garish colors and unconventional proportions, which did have a memorable impact, though it was not always done well. You may like this kind of direction of character design, but for me, it personally is not very pleasing to look at and hasn't aged well. The final example is one that was a bit of a disappointment to me when I first played it. Spider-Man Separation Anxiety and Maximum Carnage on the Super Nintendo. I was a huge fan of the comics at the time and was hoping for something very close to the look of what I saw on those pages. And while the art design is not bad in the game, it's just lacking from my perspective. It was a bit of a letdown, with a general kind of rushed feeling to many of the characters. And even the gameplay itself didn't really feel like what I thought Spider-Man would be doing, beating up a bunch of low-level stuff. I prefer the look of Captain America and the Avengers on the arcade or Sega Genesis, or even the Sega arcade version of Spider-Man.